we're talking about risk management right now and what it really entails. And a lot of times when we think about risk management, the term itself is so confusing. I think it denotates something so big and so complex, but it really isn't. Really, what risk management is what is risk and what the heck can I do with it? What do I do with it? So the basis of risk management, really, what it comes down to is the relationship that we have with risk. You know, we all know that risk is unavoidable. I mean, without risk, there is no reward. So we have a complicated relationship with risk. We want to avoid it, but at the same time, the reason why a lot of us went into business is because um, risk, as we identified the risk, we saw solutions and we saw products and we saw services that would come in and kind of resolve. So it's a complicated relationship. Risk is not really our enemy. You know, what we need to do is learn how to manage it and learn how to handle it. So it's because without risk, there's a company can't innovate, they can't manage, they can't grow, right? But if you take on too much risk and you take it on the wrong way, then like Smyrna said, your business is going to go downhill very fast, very soon. So finding a balance in handling that risk is really what risk management is all about. Believe it or not, there are professionals that handle this area. You have your risk managers, you have your consultants, etc. But in reality, everybody is a risk manager. The owners of the company, the employees, managers in your household, because there is such a thing as risk management for the house. Your spouse, your significant others, we're all risk managers because we're all sitting there looking at the risk and evaluating and figuring out what to do with it. And that's really come to the forefront now with everybody working from home and spending all that time together in a small space. We're really doing risk management on a daily basis, and we don't really know we're doing it. To be honest, so that's why I think risk management as a term is a misleading term. I almost see risk management as a same way that you see a business consultant. We're just looking at the business. We're figuring out where the hazards and the perils are, and we're going to come up with some solutions so you can make some decisions and actually, take some action or be prepared. If you're not prepared, then you are going to fail sooner or later. There's nothing to it. As we really dive deep into the risk management and we start seeing what it is that made us go into business, right? And we have all these things in our mind. And I'm running the business right now, and I have to worry about the income and sales and the clients and the employees and supply and expenses and trade and growth. And you have 25 things going on. The last thing you may be thinking about right now is, do I need to sit down and figure out this whole risk management thing? And I don't have time for that. This guy's a clown. What are you talking about? No, you've already been doing it. People don't realize we've already been doing this from day one. Is for the most part, a lot of us didn't have a set plan in place. We didn't really have a process or a set of processes. So we've kind of done it, in our own way, somewhat successfully. But there's a lot of meat left on that bone if we're able to kind of take a step back and see how we can better that process, which is what we're hoping we can accomplish today. I'll give you some tools on that and some knowledge, how we can fine tune that process and look at it from a better angle so we can start taking more calculated risk. You can't avoid the risk. Some risk you're gonna have to shut out. But for the most part, if you don't take those risks, your business is not going to go anywhere. We have to take a calculated risk. If we don't take a calculated risk, then there is gonna be no reward. So the key term here with risk management is, what is a calculated risk, and how do I determine that? And that's where the whole process of going into the risk management program, comes into play. As we're going in and we're really figuring out our business. And again, Risk management is business consulting. We're looking at our business, we're looking at where we're going, we're seeing where we were before, we're kind of analyzing what do we do from here. And now with this virus and the shutdown, it's really forced a lot of businesses to kind to sit back and strategize and think, okay, I've been doing this, I've been doing things this way for so long, but now what do I do? Because I can't do it the same way. Where's my pivot? Where is my evolution? Where is my change? That's all risk management. Really, those conversations. We can make this as complicated as it can be, but in reality, it's a very simple conversation. It is based on common sense, and it is based on having a logical approach to looking at your business. And I think that's really hard for us because, I myself, as a business owner, my business is my baby. I've got two little boys, which I love. And those are my kids, and I love them. But my third child was or is my business. So a lot of times when we're looking at it, we're looking at it from an emotional standpoint. And sometimes when we do that, we're not really able to look at things in the correct manner, in the right way. So we're missing a lot of things. So I think that having an actual process or set of procedures to look at this risk and you standardize them is going to allow you to, step back from an emotional state, go into a logical state, and really identify where the risks are, figure out what kind of risk, how important is it, and what the heck can I do about it? And remember, not all the risks are going to be important risks. Some of these risks are identifiable. They're so small. You're like, you know what? That risk, if that happens, it may not affect me. It's a 1 in a million chance. Okay, I saw it, I filed it, and I move on, right? But some of these risks are really big. And if you don't really look at them and identify them and figure out how to control them, they're going to hit you. They're going to hit you upside your head. And you're not going to see what's coming until it's already there. So, again, there's a lot of opportunity to kind of come in and look at our business and see how the risk management process can work. It's a very simple process. Now, remember, understanding and managing risk is a very simple term. Now, risk itself is very broad. I mean, it's like looking at clouds in the sky, man. Things are huge. I don't know what's going on. But so it's a very broad concept, but the process itself has to be very rigid. It has to be a solid process. So we have to have a beginning, we have to have an end, right? If we don't have a beginning and an end, then we're going to get off track, and that's very easy to do. Now, having a process and understanding what the process, what this particular process is, if you see the slide here, we can see that the process runs in a circle. Why? Because the risk management process is a never-ending process. It's not. It's going to take you to the paces, but the last step in that process always leads back to the first step. Why? Because, again, business is always changing, our environment is always changing, risk is always changing, our circumstances are always changing. So when we figure out a risk and we figure out how to handle it today, 3 months from now, things can change, and the way that we're handling that risk right now is not going to work then. So what do? Are we stuck again? No, because we're constantly reevaluating, we're constantly looking and monitoring and bettering the system. We're going to identify that our previous solution is not going to work anymore. So what are we going to do? We're going to come up with something else, and we'll go through that process again. And here's where company culture and training are so important, because again, like I said in the beginning, we're all risk managers, not just the owners, but the employees. So if you're able to empower your employees and your coworkers or your partners, or anybody else that's involved in your business, and you empower them and you kind of show them this process, and you shift their mindset to be looking out for it, they're gonna be acting as risk managers automatically. They're gonna start identifying things. Your employee's gonna walk through your warehouse and he's going to see something that's wrong, and automatically, because the training is there, the department is there, he's going to say, hey, we have an issue with this. This is a safety issue. What can we do about it? Hey, why don't we institute this type of training, or why don't we get a better machinery, or why don't we get some safety protocols, etc. He just went through that whole process of risk management and resolved the issue, and we just took care of that risk before it turned into something ugly. So again, the right culture and the right training for everybody in the organization is so important, because that is going to make it into an organic process, and that's what you want. Risk management, again, we're going to get real deep into the mechanics of the process and the terminology, et cetera. It's going to get real deep. But the basis of it is based in common sense. I'm walking around and I'm having conversations and I'm looking at my processes and procedures, and I'm figuring out what could happen here, what could happen there, and what can I do about it? How's it going to affect me? So it's almost like talking strategy. And remember, a lot of times we are so busy working in the business that we forget that we also have to take time to work on the business, right? And that's what risk management is working on the business. And so as we get into the process, we want to see what is risk. I mean, the heck is risk? Again, there's a definition that's super long and super complicated, but the gist of it is risk is the possibility of something bad happening. Okay, that's all it is. It is a possibility that something is going to happen and it may not go my way. Right? Now, there are some positive risks that you can take. So if I take the risk, I'm going to get the reward. But for the most part, the reason why we identify risk is because if the risk goes unchecked, something bad's going to happen down the line, right? And you don't want to do that. And it's the uncertainty of it. It's the what if. Now, obviously, here's where common sense kind of comes into play, because you can't plan for everything. This is impossible. If you start sitting there and writing down all the what ifs on something, we'll be here for 3 days and still not get halfway done, right? But it is important to figure out some of the what ifs, the most important ones that affect that type of area of the business, and kind of have an idea. Because if you cover most of them, then you're going to be in a better place than if you cover none of them. So as we're looking at what a risk is, and we're really looking for an actual definition, we are looking at what could possibly happen and how could it affect me. Risk can be really, subdivided into different types of risk. You have your legal risk. Maybe I have uncertainty with the courts, the contract, or towards an agreement. Maybe a contract is bad there and it's not in my favor. And that's a risk for my business. If I get into that contract, it's not going to go well for me when they execute it. I'm going to be in a bad position. So that's a legal risk. A regulatory risk. There's uncertainty with the government, state, local, state, federal, what decisions they're making. Look what happened with, with the shutdown. There's nothing we could do about it, right? But regulation says that I can't open up my restaurant, and that has a direct effect on my business. And that was the big risk. It's a hazard. And it cost, me a loss of income. What can I do, or what could I do to control that risk for the next time? You have an income risk. This is where you get into your cash flow issues and the sources of income or lack thereof. We don't steady. You have operational risks, which are a lot of times when people think about risk management, they really think about operational risks because those are the most popular. I have a warehouse, I have a factory. And the uncertainty about the inability to produce or provide my goods or services. Maybe it's a safety issue, maybe it's a structural issue, maybe you don't have the right equipment, maybe you have old equipment that's going to break down tomorrow. Those are all operational risks. Employee risks, which to me are some of the most important risks that you have to look at and be cognizant of. The availability of good employees, especially in this market. Retention. How much does it cost you to bring in and train a new employee? The quality of work, injury, lawsuits from the employees themselves, or employee theft. These are all risks that exist in all the businesses and big potholes. And sometimes, a lot of times, I think business owners, they may know that they're there, but man, it's so complicated. I'm just gonna trust, or do my employees will never do that to me? Nah, man, they will. So having a plan in place to at least have a conversation about that particular risk and throwing out some what ifs, figuring out where it's at and what I can do about it, what my options are. That's risk management right there. And it's very important. You really can't ignore that. It's too big of a risk, right? So when we start getting into that risk management process, and again, like I said before, it's a very rigid process. The term risk is very broad. The process has to be rigid, right? There's steps to be taken, very easy steps. Again, common sense comes into play. Okay, so when we're looking at a particular risk, I'm looking at my business, I'll sit back and I'll start thinking, okay, man, what can I do to look at the particular risk that I have on here? Well, I want to take certain steps. I want to determine the objective of my risk management plan. Man, that sounds really complicated, Julian. What are you talking about? You sound like a consultant. No, man, look, all you're doing is figuring out, first of all, what am I trying to accomplish with this risk management plan? What's my broad goal? Am I trying to improve safety? Am I trying to improve profits? Am I trying to improve productivity? Do I see that I have an issue with employee health and safety? That's really determining my objective, right? So once I know what my objective is, then I start identifying where the risks are. What are the risks faced by my company, by my organization, or even in my house that cannot align to my goals, right? Once you identify the risks, and then don't worry, we're gonna, go in a little bit deeper into each one of the steps. But once we identify the risk, more importantly, we got to evaluate the risk. What do you mean by evaluating the risk? What are you talking about? Well, remember, there's all bunch of different kinds of risk. Some risk is good risk. A lot of risk is bad risk. When you evaluate a risk, right, you're really taking into consideration how risk adverse or how much of an appetite for risk you have. And everybody's different. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody needs to be different. I have a high tolerance for risk. Somebody else may not. So you take that into consideration and say, okay, the risk is this, right? So let me evaluate it. The likelihood that that's going to happen is very low. And the effect on my business is kind of low. Man, that's not even on my radar. I saw it, identified it, I'm gonna push it aside. Or, man, that risk, it's not a matter of if, but when. And when it hits, it's gonna really mess me up. That's a high risk, high probability. I gotta put that top of the list because when it hits, it's gonna hit me hard. So now I'm evaluating all these risks. And the way that you evaluate them, you want to do a matrix, we'll show here shortly, and that's going to show you where your priorities are. Because man, when you're evaluating risk, there's conflict that can arise. There's limited funding, obviously, and there's limited time in the day for you to dedicate to doing all these solutions. So if I have two risks that are competing for the same dollar, how do I know where to fund it or what to put attention to? That's where the evaluation comes in. I have to rank them, right? So once I know where the risk is at, I evaluate it so I see how high or low it is on my scale. Then I want to start looking at saying, what are my options, right? So I'm going to analyze the risk and say, okay, how do I deal with this? How do I handle it? What are my different options when it comes to this particular thing? Am I going to transfer it out? Am I going to finance it? Am I going to take it on myself? Am I going to ignore it? Because sometimes you have to ignore those risks. It's not a big deal. So we going down the line, we identified it. Now we're going to figure out what the heck it is that we're going to do with it. And kind of like what Josh said earlier, which kind of, really hit me was, and again, what he was doing with goal setting and his whole program, that's risk management. It really is. That's the gist of it. Right? So in his process, he was saying, really spending a lot of time developing the problem and identifying it and figuring it out. And then they spend the last bit of time at the end with solving it. And it's the same thing with this process. We're going to spend the bulk of our time evaluating, analyzing, and identifying it, right? Because the options that we have to deal with it, they're right there. They're easy. They're laid out for us. So it's just a matter of figuring out where it is, what it is, and how it's going to affect me. And once you get that figured out, then the easy part is really choosing an option and saying, okay, I'm going to go down this lane, that lane, or that lane, and then putting a plan in action, right? Once you figure out what road you're going to take, then you're going to implement the decision. Once you implement that decision, the most important thing, I think, the last two steps, I think, are the most important. If you have a plan in place and you don't do anything about it, you just wasted your time. So it's the action. It's putting it in place and actually following through with that solution, and then continuously monitoring and reviewing what it is that you did about that, constantly evolving, every week, every month, every quarter, or some risk you evaluate once a year, whatever. But constantly evaluating and coming back to it. If you don't do those last two things, then you're not doing it. You're messing around, right? And we don't want to mess around because our business is our baby, and we got to take care of baby. Yeah. So as we're going through the process, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to determine the plan objectives. So we're going back to the beginning. I said, okay, what are you talking about? What do you mean plan objectives? What are my broad objectives? And remember, we start with broad and we start narrowing it down. So from broad to narrow, right? Like a funnel. Sample. I want to provide employees with a safe work environment. I want to increase my profit X amount. I want to cut my expenses X amount. I want to get into this new market because I saw an opportunity there, and I identified it. I want to pivot into that space. Okay, so these are some broad objectives that we want to look at as part of the risk management program. And once you identify what the broad objective is, and you start really digging down and just like setting a goal, you get it narrower and narrower and narrower. And once you get it real narrow, then you can really start getting into the next part. But remember, like I said before, some of these objectives can provide conflict within the company. So we have to be cognizant of that. I have two issues in my company. I need to raise safety, but I also need to be able to retain employees. So as I'm digging down in that process, I find out that my machines are unsafe. I got to replace them. But then I also dig down into my retention and say, I'm underpaying my employees. They're leaving. So I need to really evaluate and see, because I got limited dollars. Where does it go first? Is it interchangeable? Are they easy? What do I do? And that's where the evaluation really comes into play. Because if you don't, then, again, you overanalyze, you're not going to do anything. And I think at this point in time, using a SWOT analysis, something that you may or may not be familiar with, is used a lot in business plan creation. It's very important. It's a really helpful tool. So what's a SWOT analysis? S stands for strengths of the company. W stands for weaknesses of the company. O stands for opportunity. And the T stands for the threats. And usually in a business plan, we're looking at it more from the inside out. I'm looking at the market. What are the strengths of my company, my product, or my service going into the market? What are my weaknesses in here that I can get better at? Where's my opportunity out there in the marketplace? And where are my threats, which are my competitors or the market or whatever, right? But when we're looking at it here for the risk analysis, you want to really concentrate on your weaknesses, and you want to concentrate on your threats. And the threats are going to be an interior threat, right? And you kind of combine those with the opportunity that you see. And that's what the risk is, risk versus reward, right? And you start looking at it that way. So you start making your list, but you're looking at it from the inside out a little bit better, because that way you're able to really, and again, the key to this is to look at it from an objective, logical point of view. Again, we're creatures of emotion. The business is our baby, but if we don't look at it from a logical point of view, you're going to miss a lot of the key points, right? So as we're looking at our strengths and our weaknesses and opportunities and our threats, and you start determining how that plays into your goal, right? You really start narrowing it down, again, broad to narrow. And what you're going to come up with is your goal is going to be comprised probably of different steps. But what you're doing is you're really aiming to hit that target. Because once you do that, now you got a plan of attack. Okay? Now you have a plan of attack. If I know what it is that I'm trying to accomplish, I know where I'm getting there. And when you're really identifying your risks, you want to go back to journalism school and go with the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, how. And the underlying question is always why. Why, Julian? Because when I'm looking at deconstructing a process or a procedure or something that's going on in my company, right? Asking those basic questions, that's how you're really going to get into the deep part of the matter. Who's doing this, and who's the beneficiary? What are we doing? What is the purpose? How are we doing things? What's the process? When are we doing it by? What's the time frame on it? Where are we doing it? How's my operation? Where's my, how's my property, etc. But the underline is always why. Who's doing this and why are they doing it? And what are we doing and why are they doing it? So once you start identifying those risks like that, and we start looking at it from that point of view, then you really start framing what it is that you're trying to accomplish, because you're deconstructing the processes and the workflows. Because here is when you really start seeing what the type of risks are. And again, like we said before, what's my legal risk? What's my property risk? What's my income risk? And when you identify them and you start deconstructing that process and the procedure, then you really start getting an insight into where the opportunity is. Going back to the SWOT, right? So when you ID your risk, right, you want to see what the cost in effect versus your loss would be. And that's where you start getting into really categorizing the risk. Because once you do that, then you'll start seeing it as a metric and saying, okay, the probability of that happening versus the cost that it could or could not, or how it's going to hit me. That's what's really going to determine what kind of action you take. And remember, it's an educated guess at best. This isn't rocket science. It's not you can really dive down deep into it with data and models and statistics, etc. But in reality, what you want to do is take an educated guess, try to hit the broad points of it, narrow it down a little bit, because most risk is not static. It's going to change over time anyway, and you want to find a balance between high and low. No plan is going to be a perfect plan. Obviously, we know that. So once you evaluate your risk, you should be able to develop something like a matrix like this. You have a model. You see on your left-hand side, you have your impact, low to high, and you have your likelihood, which is low to high. And that's where you really start identifying, man, how much attention you're going to give to that risk. Is it way up there? High impact and high likelihood, do top of the list. Is it all the way down here, low impact and low likelihood? That might be an acceptable risk. Say, the heck with it, I can live with it. And anywhere in between, then you really start making the educated decisions on what you want to do with it. So now that we know what the risk is, where it is, and how it's going to affect me, what's next? What do I do with it? Right? And again, we spent all this time figuring all this other stuff out. Now, what do we do with this? What are our options? Wow, dude, options are awesome. You can do risk control. What does that mean? Risk control. Dude, we can do loss prevention. Hey, I have a retail store and I have a high value item. Instead of putting that on the counter, I'm going to put it behind glass. Oh, okay. It sounds like common sense, but sometimes it's not, right? Or can do loss reduction. I have a warehouse, machinery and stuff like that. I'm going to install sprinklers. I'm going to put some fire extinguishers all around, because if there's a fire, having those things in place is going to reduce, the effect of that fire on my property. So I'm going to reduce my loss, right? Or I'm going to back up all my computer systems and use Phil Smith to handle all my IT, so that if I have a loss of computers in my place of business, I have a safe backup over there. I don't lose all my data. So I'm reducing my loss, right? Or I'm going to do loss avoidance. I'm just going to eliminate the possibility of the risk. You know what, man? I identified it. I saw the risk versus reward. It's just not worth it. I don't want to mess with it. Get away from me. So I'm going to just avoid the risk, right? We can do risk financing. And what's risk financing? Basically, risk financing and risk transfer are almost the same thing. I'm going to buy an insurance policy so that I can transfer a lot of that risk over to the insurance policy. And if something happens, all I got to do is pay a deductible, and I'm going to be made whole again. So I'm financing it because I'm paying for the policy, and I'm also transferring some of that risk out, right? Another form of risk transfer, and we see this a lot in the construction space, is I'm going to subcontract out of work. I just, for example, I take on a job. I want to bid with the city of Ocala, and I want to do janitorial stuff in their building, and they want me to do some pressure cleaning. Yeah, I know how to clean a building, but I don't know how to pressure clean. What am I going to do? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to subcontract it out to a pressure cleaning company who knows what they're doing. So I'm transferring that risk over to them because I'm going to make sure that they have insurance and that their insurance actually, covers me as the main contractor. So now if something happens, I transfer the risk out, right? What's another thing that I can do? Well, risk retention. You know what? I can live with that risk. I have cash reserves. I have funds. I'm going to do a self-retention on it. I'm going to finance it myself. If I get hit on it, you know what? I can take that hit. That's another way to handle the risk. And again, everybody's going to find their safe spot and what works for them according to their level of appetite for risk and their financial resources, where they are with the business, what the plan is, et cetera. So again, this is why I think that risk management is really business consulting under a different name, because it's a roadmap. And this really goes towards what Esmerna was talking about earlier. And for example, starting a business with credit card debt, that's a big risk, right? But what's the reward? I'm going to start the business. What's the risk? I'm going deep into debt. And if I don't make cash flow, it's going to bury me, right? So risk versus reward, what are we doing? We're really, managing that risk and figuring out what we're going to do. Is it worth it or not, right? So once we figure that out, we're going to get to this place here where obviously you have your matrix there, shows you where the risks are, and then you have your plan. Here's my plan: employee injuries. Here's my mitigation plan. What am I going to do about it? Employee safety plan. I'm going to do some training, blah, 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 right? So we go from planning to execution, because if you don't execute, then you're not doing anything, right? As a business, as a corporation, sole proprietorship, whatever, you want to kind of go through these steps here. And you're going to go from naive, which is an ugly word. I don't know anything about risk. I don't even know. I'm just going to wing it. And as you start incorporating all of these steps and these processes and procedures and just having that mindset, then you should be able to work your way through it from naive to I'm aware. Now I can define some of these risks. Now I'm managing them. Now, not only am I managing them, but I'm also enabling everybody in my organization to do the same thing. So it becomes a self-serving process, and it's self-perpetuating. It's just ingrained in our culture so much that it's part of our mode, right? So once you do that, and remember, the most important thing, I think, one of the most important things is you continuously monitor the decisions, right? And the program. It is like a business plan. It has to be organic, right? Like a strategy plan. It has to be organic. It has to be ever changing. It has to be flexible. Okay. The process itself is very static. It's very rigid, but the idea of it has to be flexible because things change. And here's where I think it's so important for you to realize that when you're doing risk management, you're not alone. You shouldn't be. You surround yourself with talent. You surround yourself with a team, which every business owner should be doing, either formally or informally through business networking groups. What is your team? What does your team consist of? I need an accountant, Smyrna. I need banking or finance. I need insurance. I need legal advice. And I probably need IT and marketing. And once you have those, you involve those professionals in these conversations with risk management because they're the ones that are going to really give you that perspective on how big the risk is versus the reward and what are the ramifications of it, how can it affect you or not, right? Because you know about your business, but they know about everything else. So having a team in place to involve them in these decisions, that's key. You're not alone, right? I wanted to quickly share this slide here about the coronavirus because I think it's a really good sample of risk management in action. Okay, quickly, you have your symptoms up top. Those are the results of the risk. Those are the risk results, right? Your contagion, those are your perils and hazards. That's what's gonna mess you up, right? And your prevention is your risk management plan in action. We identified what could happen. I'm gonna die. Right? And I'm identifying how the risk is showing up, which is the symptoms, and I'm putting a plan in place of risk management to handle all of this. Wash your hands, wear a face mask, don't come near me, I'm gonna punch you in the mouth, whatever it is. So that's kind of a small example of what's going on right now that government is doing, local, state, whatever, and everybody else is doing. Whether you agree with it or not, it is risk management. And so, to end, you really want to look at risk versus reward. Calculated risk is always the key word, man. You want to use common sense. You want to plan. You want to have a team of experts. And most importantly, you want to execute the plan. You want to have action. If you don't have action, you just wasted your time, right? You want to avoid that hit, man. Be proactive and not reactive. If we have risk management in place, we are going to be proactive. Instead of waiting for the hit and then reacting to it, you already missed the boat, right? You don't want to overplan, but you do want to have a plan. Avoid the paralysis by analysis. It's not going to be perfect. It doesn't have to be, but it's got to be something, and you got to act on it. And don't take such an emotional approach to it. It is a logical thing, even though our business is our baby, and babies are emotional, right? But you still want to look at it from that point of view. So to leave you with some actionable steps, and again, here's our whole flow. Very easy. Just take 30 minutes out of a day and sit down and look at your business and think, what could go wrong? What do I do? Where am I doing it? How am I doing it? Why? Right? Pick one of those lanes and kind of dig down a little bit and figure out, man, what's my risk? And do I have something in place? A lot of you probably do. Some of you may not. Some of you may have some things in place, but not others. Some of you are in a beautiful spot. But take the time to do that and share it with others, people in your organization. Have that whole process in place. But again, if just do something, at least look at it, review it. It's almost like a disaster plan. It's there for a reason, but it can't be 4 and 5 years old. No, it's not gonna work. Things change too much. So if you're gonna do anything after this, take 30 minutes, look at it, just write it down on paper. It doesn't have to be perfect, just quick what ifs. Make a note to call Esmerna, call Josh, call Phil, call Sanda, call myself, and ask us some questions. Hey, what do you think about this? I'm trying to do this with my business, or here's my pivot, or I have a question about contract, or whatever. And just reach out to your network, to all those professionals. That's risk management, because you're actually looking at a problem or a risk and trying to find a solution for it. Okay. That's all I have for today. I really appreciate everybody being on and taking the time. If anybody has any questions or anything, please feel free. We have our contact information here at the bottom.